Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The sun was setting, but it no longer mattered in the bustling city of New Chicago. People moved about in their daily lives, heads down, immersed in their virtual worlds, as the physical world faded into the background. Elliot Moore, a mid-level programmer, sat in front of his cluttered desk, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the keyboard. He was used to long hours, the kind that made days blend into one another, but this day was different. The upcoming election was going to be the biggest one in years, and Elliot's job was to ensure that the election system ran smoothly. The government had shifted to virtual reality elections 2 cycles ago. People no longer stood in lines to cast their votes. Instead, they entered sleek, immersive digital worlds, designed to be the ultimate democratic experience. Every citizen, from the wealthiest to the most impoverished, could log in and vote, experiencing the same simulated environment. It was supposed to be flawless, incorruptible, and fair. At least, that's what they were told. Elliot wasn't particularly political, but he cared about the integrity of his work. He'd been assigned to monitor the system for any bugs or irregularities. It was just another job for him until a string of anomalies began appearing on his screen. At first, they seemed like minor glitches. The vote count would jump slightly and then correct itself. Logs showed strange accesses to the database, nothing blatant, just subtle enough to avoid detection from higher-level monitoring. He sat up, narrowing his eyes as he scrolled through the logs. Something wasn't right. He clicked through layers of security protocols, and there it was again, a spike, a shift in the data that shouldn't have happened. His pulse quickened as he opened a diagnostic tool and dug deeper. The vote tally was being altered, very carefully, and very deliberately. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. This wasn't some accidental bug. Someone was actively manipulating the system. He immediately flagged the issue and fired off a message to his supervisor. Moments later, a reply pinged back, _system anomaly is noted. No further action necessary. Continue monitoring. Elliot blinked, reading the message again. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, disbelief settling in. No further action necessary? That didn't make sense. He wasn't an alarmist, but this was a significant problem. Someone was tampering with the election. He fired off another message, this time more urgent, outlining the irregularities and attaching logs. Another ping. This time it was curt, do not escalate further. Elliot felt a knot form in his stomach. His supervisors were brushing this off, which meant either they were ignoring the problem or, worse, they were in on it. He stood up from his desk, pacing the small room. Something had to be done, but he couldn't do it alone. He grabbed his phone and dialed the only person he knew could help. Hello? A familiar voice answered after 2 rings. Nina, it's Elliot. I need your help, he said, glancing over his shoulder, half expecting someone to burst into the room. Elliot? It's been years. What's going on? Nina's voice was curious, but a bit cautious. They hadn't spoken since she left the cybersecurity firm to go freelance. I think someone's messing with the election. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you serious? Dead serious. I found something in the logs, someone's altering votes. I tried reporting it, but I got shut down. Nina sighed. This sounds like a rabbit hole you don't want to go down. I know, Elliot admitted, rubbing his temple. But if we don't, who will? Another long pause. Finally, Nina's voice softened. All right. I'm in. Send me everything you've got. Elliot exhaled, feeling a sense of relief. Nina had always been the best at getting into places she wasn't supposed to. Within minutes, he sent her the logs, code snippets, and a breakdown of the anomalies. Now, all he could do was wait. Hours passed before Nina's voice crackled back through his phone. "I've got bad news." Elliot tensed. "What is it?" "You're not wrong," she said, her voice low. "Someone is definitely inside the system, and they're good. The code's clean, almost too clean. If I didn't know better, I'd say it's someone on the inside." Elliot swallowed hard. "Can you trace it?" "I'm trying," she replied, her fingers clicking rapidly in the background. "But whoever's doing this knows what they're doing. I can't get a direct link. It's encrypted, routed through multiple channels. It's gonna take time." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "We don't have time. The election is in 3 days. If they're manipulating votes now, who knows what else they've planned." Nina was silent for a moment. "I might know someone who can help." "Who?" Elliot asked, hopeful. "A guy named Jake. He's a systems engineer. Specializes in VR environments. If anyone can break through, it's him. But he's not exactly legal." Elliot sighed. "At this point, I don't care about legal. We need to stop this." The next day, Elliot and Nina met with Jake in a dimly lit cafe, a dive tucked away in the city's less policed districts. Jake was a wiry man in his 30s, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and an energy that suggested he never quite stopped moving. "You're telling me someone's rigging the election?" Jake asked, tapping a pen on the table in front of him. "That's what it looks like," Elliot said, glancing at Nina for reassurance. "Do you know who?" Jake pressed, his eyes narrowing. "Not yet," Nina admitted. "But we need your help getting deeper into the VR system. You know it better than anyone." Jake leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "This is dangerous territory. If we get caught, it's not just a slap on the wrist." "We're already in it," Elliot replied. "This election could decide the fate of millions. We can't let it be stolen." Jake was silent for a moment, then shrugged. "All right, I'm in. But we're gonna need someone who knows encryption. I can get into the VR systems, but cracking the codes, that's not my specialty." Elliot nodded. "I know someone. Her name's Maria. She's a data analyst. If anyone can help us decrypt the signals, it's her." The team was coming together. Over the next few hours, they worked in a cramped apartment, dimly lit by the glow of multiple monitors. Jake worked on infiltrating the VR systems, while Nina traced the hackers' movements. Maria, a calm and methodical woman in her early 30s, sat silently, decrypting the streams of data that flowed from the election servers. "We're running out of time," Elliot muttered, glancing at the clock. Less than 48 hours until election day, and they were still chasing shadows. "I've got something," Maria said, breaking the silence. All eyes turned to her. "What is it?" Elliot asked, moving to her side. "It's a signal," she explained, tapping her screen. "Whoever's doing this is using a hidden network. They're bouncing the signal off satellite nodes across the globe, but there's a pattern." "Can you trace it?" Nina asked. Maria nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's slow, but yes. If we follow this, we can find the source." Elliot's heart pounded as the trail began to unfold in front of them. Each piece of data brought them closer to the mastermind behind the election manipulation. Hours passed, and finally, Maria's screen pinged with the result. "I've got an address," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Where?" Jake asked, leaning in. "Downtown. A corporate building, owned by Victor Crane." Elliot felt his stomach drop. Crane was one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, with deep ties to one of the presidential candidates. If Crane was behind this, it meant the conspiracy ran far deeper than they had imagined. "We need to stop him," Elliot said, standing up. "Before it's too late." "How?" Nina asked, her voice filled with concern. "We're just a few people going up against one of the most powerful men in the world. If we get caught, we won't," Elliot said, his resolve hardening. "We can't." With the election looming and time slipping away, they knew the only way to stop Crane was to confront him directly, inside the virtual world. The plan was reckless. Elliot knew it. But with time running out, they had no choice. The only way to confront Victor Crane was in the very place he had built his empire, the virtual world. Jake had already rigged their access into the deepest layers of the VR election system. They would enter anonymously, bypassing the usual security protocols, and find Crane before he could unleash the final blow to democracy. The group gathered around Jake's monitors, the air thick with tension. Maria finished a scan, ensuring their entry would go unnoticed. "Once we're inside, we have to move fast," Jake said, typing furiously. "Crane's got the system under heavy surveillance. If we stay too long, we'll be flagged." "How much time do we have?" Elliot asked. Jake glanced at the screen. 30 minutes, max. After that, the system locks us out or worse, traces us." Nina handed Elliot a sleek VR headset. "Ready for this?" Elliot stared at the device for a moment before pulling it over his head. The hum of the real world faded, replaced by a disorienting rush as the virtual landscape solidified around him. His stomach lurched as his body adjusted to the strange yet familiar sensation of being in two places at once. They materialized in what appeared to be an endless digital expanse, an abstract space of floating data streams and pulsing light. This was the back end of the election system, where the true architecture of the vote was controlled. It was like stepping into the heart of a machine, where every line of code had physical form, weaving through the air like strands of silk. "We're in," Nina's voice echoed in Elliot's earpiece, distorted slightly by the virtual space. "Where's Crane?" Elliot asked, turning slowly, scanning the environment for signs of life. "Give me a second," Jake replied. He flicked his hand, and a series of translucent windows popped into view, code running across them like waterfalls of numbers. "He's somewhere in the central control node. That's where he'll launch the final command to rewrite the election results." "Lead the way," Elliot said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The four of them moved quickly through the shifting landscape. The deeper they went, the more the environment changed. The serene expanse of data gave way to walls of encryption, towering like fortress gates, symbols flashing and flickering as they passed. The further they traveled, the heavier the air seemed to become, as if the system itself was aware of their intrusion. "We're close," Maria said, her voice tight with concentration. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shimmered. Elliot felt the virtual floor shift, a tremor running through the space. A cold chill ran down his spine. The environment flickered, and from the shadows emerged a figure, a twisted avatar clad in dark, metallic armor, its face obscured by a smooth, featureless mask. "That's not Crane," Nina hissed. It's a guardian. Crane must have set up virtual defenses to protect himself, Jake muttered. The guardian strode toward them, its movements smooth, almost mechanical. Without hesitation, it raised its hand, and the air around them warped. Glowing chains shot from the walls, wrapping around Maria before anyone could react. She gasped as the chains constricted, pulling her toward the guardian. "Get her out of there!" Elliot shouted, reaching for Maria, but his hands passed through the virtual restraints as if they were smoke. "It's targeting her access node," Jake said, his fingers flying over his virtual interface. "If we don't sever the connection, she'll be kicked out of the system, permanently." Maria's face twisted in pain as the chains tightened, her avatar flickering. "Do it," she gasped. With a sharp motion, Jake slashed through the code, severing the chains. Maria collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, her form unstable. The guardian, undeterred, turned its attention to the rest of them. "Run," Jake said, not looking back. "We can't fight it here." They sprinted, the guardian's footsteps echoing behind them. The terrain twisted, shifting beneath their feet as they raced toward the central control node. The virtual world blurred, the lines of code warping as the system tried to process their presence. Elliot could feel the pressure building. The system was reacting to their intrusion, tightening its defenses. Finally, they reached the core. The central control node was a vast chamber, its walls lined with streams of data flowing like rivers of light. In the center stood a solitary figure, tall and imposing, his back turned to them. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, his hands clasped behind him as he watched the election's progress unfold on a massive floating screen. Victor Crane. Elliot's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the virtual air. "Crane." The figure turned slowly, his face as calm and composed as ever. "Mr. Moore," Crane said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "I was wondering when you would show up." "Stop what you're doing," Elliot demanded. "We know you've been manipulating the vote. It's over." Crane raised an eyebrow. "Over? Oh no, Mr. Moore. It's only just begun." He turned back to the screen, gesturing toward the millions of votes streaming in. "Do you see this? Democracy is a fragile thing, easily broken by its own weight. I'm merely correcting the course. You're rigging the election." Nina snapped. "This isn't correction, it's control." Crane sighed, as if speaking to children. "You and your friends, you're idealists. Naive, even. The system is flawed. People can't be trusted to make the right decisions, not when the stakes are this high. Sometimes, someone has to step in and guide them toward the proper outcome." Elliot felt his hands curl into fists. "You don't get to decide that." "And why not?" Crane asked, his eyes gleaming with a cold, dangerous light. "I have the power. I have the resources. Do you really think anyone cares about a few lines of code? In the end, they'll thank me for saving them from themselves." "That's not how democracy works," Maria said, her voice steady despite the pain she was in. Crane smiled thinly. "Democracy, dictatorship, labels. It's all the same in the end. Power belongs to those who take it. And I have taken it." With a flick of his wrist, the screen behind him lit up, showing a countdown timer. Less than 10 minutes remained until the election results were finalized. Elliot's heart raced. They were running out of time. Jake stepped forward, his eyes locked on Crane. "We're shutting you down, Crane. Right now." Crane's smile faded. "I don't think so." With a snap of his fingers, the entire room shifted. The walls of data bent inward, forming a cage around Elliot and his team. The ground beneath them rumbled as the system began to tear itself apart, code fragmenting and warping around them. "We're trapped," Nina said, panic rising in her voice. Elliot's mind raced. They couldn't fight Crane directly, he had too much control over the system. But there had to be a way to disrupt his connection, something they could exploit. "Jake," Elliot said, his voice calm but urgent. "Can you crash the node?" Jake's eyes widened. "Crash the node? Are you crazy? That would wipe the whole election system." "It's the only way," Elliot insisted. "If we can overload the system, we can force a reboot before Crane finalizes the vote. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got." Jake hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "All right, but it's gonna be rough. We'll have to take down everything, firewalls, encryption, backups, all of it." "Do it," Elliot said. As Jake began dismantling the node's defenses, Crane's expression darkened. "What are you doing?" "Stopping you," Elliot said simply. Crane's calm demeanor shattered as he realized what was happening. "You can't stop me. Do you understand what you're risking? The entire system will collapse. You'll destroy everything." "Better that than let you control it," Elliot replied. The countdown ticked down to 5 minutes as Jake worked furiously, his hands flying over the controls. The room shook violently as the system destabilized, sparks of data flying through the air like lightning. Crane lunged toward the controls, but Nina intercepted him, her avatar slamming into his with a force that sent them both sprawling. "Keep him away from the terminal," Elliot shouted, gripping his own interface as the system began to melt down around them. 3 minutes. The walls of the node trembled, code fracturing and disintegrating as the system approached total collapse. Jake was sweating, his face pale as he ripped through layers of security, bypassing encryption and firewalls with reckless abandon. 2 minutes. Crane fought furiously, his avatar flickering as he tried to regain control, but Nina held him off, her movements a blur as she fought him in the virtual world. Elliot could feel the pressure building, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. 1 minute. The system was on the brink of implosion. All around them, the digital environment crumbled, the very fabric of the virtual world tearing apart at the seams. "Almost there," Jake muttered through gritted teeth, his fingers a blur on the controls. 30 seconds. The screen behind Crane flickered, the countdown timer slowing as the system buckled under the strain. Elliot's heart pounded in his chest as the final seconds ticked away. 10 seconds. Jake hit the final command, and the entire room exploded in a burst of light. The node collapsed, the system crashing into oblivion. Everything went dark. Elliot tore off his headset, gasping for air as the real world came rushing back. He blinked, disoriented, as the sound of alarms filled the room. The election system had been rebooted, the vote wiped clean, they had done it, Crane was finished. His grip on the election had been severed, and the true votes would now be counted. Elliot slumped back in his chair, exhausted but relieved that it was over.